There's a phrase people say about a Taurus, thinking they're giving a compliment. He's so present, or depending on the day, a rant disguised as a joke. She can't stay away from you for even a weekend. You've heard it before. Maybe you've said it about someone. Maybe someone has said it about you, without ever knowing they were describing something much deeper than it seemed. We learn to label this behavior too quickly. Neediness, insecurity, a bit of control disguised as care. But what if I told you that almost all of that is wrong? That what you're seeing isn't weakness trying to disguise itself as love, but a mechanism so old, so ingrained, that even Taurus itself can't explain why it works this way. Imagine someone who texts way too early, who calls for no apparent reason, just to hear your voice for 30 seconds, who shows up at your door unannounced with some excuse, simply because they felt they needed to see for themselves that everything was all right. You label that as needy, but you've never asked what exactly that person's body is feeling the moment you leave the room. Because for Taurus, presence isn't an abstract concept. It's not an idea floating around in their head like, "I miss you." It's a physical, almost tactile sensation. The absence of someone important doesn't just become a sad thought. It becomes a discomfort in the body, a restlessness that doesn't have an exact name, a feeling that something has moved from where it should be. It's the hand that searches for the light switch in the dark, always in the same corner of the wall, and feels strange when it's not there. It's not fear of the dark. It's the shattered certainty that what was always reliable is suddenly no longer guaranteed. That's exactly the feeling a Taurus carries when someone important is away, even if only for a few hours. Now, if this discomfort is so physical, so immediate, it's worth asking, where does it really come from? Because nobody is born afraid of distance. It's something that's built. And the way Taurus builds this is through a silent, almost invisible mechanism that most people mistake for possessiveness, but which is actually something completely different. Pay attention to the little rituals, the routine that never changes, the same time to call, the same reserved place at the table, the insistence on keeping certain things always the same, even when nobody cares anymore. This isn't gratuitous stubbornness. It's a protective structure built piece by piece to ensure that what is good doesn't slip away. It's like keeping a spare key under the doormat. Not because you distrust the door, but because at some point, maybe a long time ago, maybe in a life you don't even remember well, that door didn't open when you needed it most. And the body learned, before the mind understood, that what is precious needs a plan in case luck doesn't show up. So when someone can't stand being away, maybe it's not about the person who's leaving. Maybe it never was. Maybe it's about a much older version of that same feeling, stored somewhere that even Taurus themselves can't pinpoint, waiting for the right moment to reappear. And the question remains, what to do when you finally recognize this pattern in yourself, when you realize that the person who bothered you most with this need for closeness might actually be the most honest mirror of a part of yourself that you never wanted to face, because admitting that would mean admitting that you also need someone to stay, and that perhaps you've spent your whole life trying to ensure that without ever putting that need into words. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose isn't about holding anyone back, nor about disguising a fear of instability. It's about transforming that age-old need to keep everything close into a security that's already born within you, without depending on anyone else's physical presence to feel whole. For a Taurus, this changes everything, because the search for solidity that they build outside themselves, with routine, with rituals, with silent control, can finally be built inside, where nothing and no one can take it away. If you've made it this far, you're probably still feeling that discomfort in your chest, trying to understand if what you feel for someone or what someone feels for you is healthy attachment or an old wound trying to reopen. This is exactly the moment to act, while that perception is still alive, before routine erases that clarity you just felt. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Tell me in the comments, do you recognize in yourself or in someone you love this difficulty in being apart without feeling that something is wrong? Because a Taurus's calmness deceives everyone, including themselves. From the outside, they seem serene. They seem like someone who is never shaken, who follows their own rhythm without haste, who is not affected by anything. But behind this calmness lies a dam. And a dam is not an absence of strength. It is all the strength being held back, day after day, so that nothing overflows. Have you ever noticed how a Taurus is rarely the first to show panic in a crisis? While everyone around them despairs, they remain quiet, tackling one thing at a time, as if none of it affects them deeply. People admire this, calling it strength, emotional maturity. But nobody asks the price of this quietness. Nobody asks where all that emotion they chose not to feel in the moment ends up. The fear that drives a Taurus rarely manifests as fear. It appears as inflexible routine, as that insistence on keeping everything the same, as the almost imperceptible discomfort when a plan changes at the last minute. No one sees a Taurus tremble because, for them, trembling has never been a safe option. They learned at some point that voicing fear didn't bring anyone back. So the way they found to deal with it was to transform that fear into silent control over everything they can control. And here's the detail nobody tells you. The more important a person is to a Taurus, the bigger this dam is inside. It's not about distrusting the person they love. It's about never again wanting to be caught off guard by a loss they didn't see coming. That's why they keep things hidden. That's why they repeat the same gestures. That's why they want to know where you are, not because they distrust you, but because they distrust the world, and you've become the fixed center they've chosen to avoid suspicion. This type of love, silent and watchful, is rarely recognized as love. It is confused with control, with insecurity, sometimes even with possessiveness. But those who understand what lies behind it see something else. Someone who learned, too early, that holding on is safer than trusting without a safety net. If you've recognized this fear, disguised as calmness in someone you love, or within yourself, perhaps it's time to confront this dam head-on. The book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac, Sign to a Life of Purpose, addresses exactly this point. Transforming the silent fear of loss into a security that doesn't depend on watching anyone, because it's already built from within. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. After this dam is revealed, something changes in the way Taurus approaches their loved one again. An almost invisible ritual of return takes place. After any distance, however small, there is a movement of reconstruction, the message confirming that everything is all right, the hug that lasts a little longer than necessary, the silence shared on the same sofa without the rush to fill it with words. Pay attention to the small details, the way he organizes the house before you arrive, not out of perfectionism, but as if preparing the ground to receive something important. The way he stores food, stores money, stores souvenirs, always a little more than he needs, as if the excess were the only guarantee against a future that could at any moment take everything away again. This isn't about accumulating out of greed. It's about never again being caught with the ground beneath your feet. There's also the way he remembers details you didn't even realize you mentioned. A distant relative's birthday, the brand of your favorite perfume, the fact that you don't like raw onions. These details aren't coincidence or lucky good memory. They're how Taurus maps out what's important, keeping each little piece as if slowly building a safe place where your loved one will always fit. This isn't silly insistence. It's like someone who, after feeling an earthquake, goes around checking if the furniture in the house is still firmly on the floor. Not because they think it's going to collapse again at any moment, but because their body needs this confirmation to finally relax. And it's curious to notice that this confirmation never seems to last long. In a few hours or a few days, the restlessness returns, quietly, asking for the same ritual again. Why does rebuilding that security never seem to be enough for very long? Because the root of this pattern isn't about the current person. It's about a much older absence, recorded in a time that Taurus themselves may not even remember clearly. It could be childhood instability. It could be a loss that was never fully processed. It could even be something as subtle as growing up in an environment where affection came and went, without warning, without explanation. The body remembers this even when the mind forgets. It's like a house rebuilt after a flood, even dry, even beautiful again. It reinforces the foundations every time the sky darkens, just to be sure. A Taurus does this emotionally. They reinforce the bonds every time they feel any sign of instability, even if rationally they know there's no real reason to worry. And the most curious thing is that this wound rarely presents itself as a clear memory. It doesn't usually come as a specific scene that he can point to and say, "This is where it all began." It comes as a diffuse feeling, a discomfort that appears whenever something important starts to seem too good to last. It's almost as if deep down there's a quiet voice asking when this too will go away, even when there's no real sign that it will. Sometimes this origin doesn't even need to be dramatic. It could be a childhood move to a new city where no one asked for their opinion. It could be a father who worked too much and was rarely around. It could simply be growing up in a home where affection was shown inconsistently, sometimes too close, sometimes too far away, without any pattern a child could predict. A child's body doesn't need tragedy to learn that security is something that can disappear. Repeated unpredictability is enough for this lesson to be deeply ingrained. This wound is old enough to raise a difficult question. Is it truly possible to heal it, or only to learn to live with it in a gentler way? Perhaps the answer lies less in erasing the wound and more in ceasing to treat the need for security as a flaw to be hidden. While this wound still dictates a large part of your emotional choices, each separation will continue to hurt more than it should. The book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, proposes exactly this other path. Recognizing this old wound without being ashamed of it and learning to nurture within yourself the same solidity that you try so hard to guarantee on the outside. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's an interesting paradox in all of this. The more independent a Taurus seems on the outside, the more this independence is often actually a structure built to never again depend on someone who might simply disappear. That's why the same person who seems self-sufficient, who solves their own problems, who rarely asks for help, is also the one who most values having someone steady nearby, someone with whom they can finally, little by little, stop doing everything alone. Imagine a tree with deep roots. From the outside it seems motionless, quiet, almost indifferent to the wind, but it only stood year after year because it never stopped rooting itself deeper, silently, beneath the earth, where no one sees the work being done. Taurus's independence is exactly that. Roots working tirelessly so that above, everything appears peaceful. Perhaps you've seen this type of person up close. Someone who carries the weight of everything alone for years, without complaining, without asking for help, and who only when they finally find someone trustworthy lets slip how tired they were of holding everything on their own. It's not that this person didn't need anyone, it's that they were never sure they could need someone without it becoming yet another reason to be abandoned. There's something profoundly human in this paradox. The person who seems to need no one the most is almost always the one who has learned best to fend for themselves, because at some point, needing someone wasn't enough to guarantee they would stay. And when that person finally finds someone they trust enough to let their guard down, what seems like neediness to an outside observer is actually an enormous relief. Finally, someone to share the burden they've carried alone for so long. What if what has always been called neediness is, in fact, the most honest form of love that exists? Because neediness is often used as an insult for those who admit out loud what everyone feels but prefers to hide. That the distance from the one they love does indeed bother them. That missing someone isn't weakness, it's sensitivity functioning exactly as it should. We live in an era that has learned to admire indifference. Those who pretend not to care are seen as self-assured. Those who show they care too much are seen as weak, as someone who is asking for too much. But nobody stops to think about what this culture of feigning indifference costs in relationships. How many people have distanced themselves from someone good simply because they were ashamed to admit they missed them? How many bonds have slowly died because nobody wanted to be the first to say, "I need you around"? A Taurus's inability to remain indifferent to the distance from someone they love doesn't stem from weakness. It stems from emotional honesty. They simply refuse to pretend they don't feel, refuse to downplay something that truly matters to them, even when it means appearing more vulnerable than they would like. And there's a quiet courage in that almost no one recognizes, because it's easy to seem strong when you don't allow yourself to feel anything. The difficult thing, the really difficult thing, is to continue feeling everything, to continue caring in the same way, even knowing that it leaves you exposed, even knowing that admitting you need someone is, in a way, giving that person the power to hurt you. A Taurus chooses this exposure every day, even if they never say it openly. It's not attachment, it's the Earth's loyalty. The Earth doesn't feign indifference to the seasons. It responds to the rain, the sun, the cold, without shame, and it is precisely because of this capacity to feel and respond that it manages to sustain life year after year. A Taurus who can't bear to be away from someone is, in their own way, doing the same thing, responding with their whole being to what truly matters instead of feigning an indifference they never truly felt. If you've come this far recognizing this pattern, perhaps it's time to stop treating this sensitivity as a problem to be solved and start understanding it as the most honest foundation you have for building any lasting relationship. The book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, exists precisely for this. To help those who feel too much transform this sensitivity into a firm root, instead of trying to uproot it from within themselves. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. In the end, perhaps the question should never have been why this person can't stand being away from you. Perhaps the right question has always been, what do you do with someone who refuses to feign indifference in an era when almost everyone has learned to pretend they don't need anyone? A Taurus seeking your presence isn't trying to hold you back. They're showing you in the only way they know how, routinely, consistently, with their feet firmly on the ground, that what they feel is real, is firm, and won't go away just because it's inconvenient to admit. There's no calculation involved, no strategy. There's simply someone who, at some point in their life, decided they'd rather be seen as too much than as someone who never truly cared. The next time you miss someone in a way that feels overwhelming, or realize someone misses you intensely, maybe it's worth pausing before labeling it weakness. Maybe it's just Earth recognizing Earth. Maybe it's just someone who has learned over time that love that cares enough to stick around isn't a prison. It's the only thing capable of holding everything together when the rest of the world falters. And perhaps deep down, this isn't a flaw to be corrected. Perhaps it's exactly the kind of love that anyone, one day, tired of so much feigned indifference, hopes to find. Someone who stays, not because it's easy, but because they choose every day to remain close.